students, I am Paulami Das and today we are going to learn about how to assess writing, the tools and strategies that a teacher can use. Assessment of student writing is a crucial process. Assessment of student writing and performance in the class should occur at many different stages throughout the course and could come in many different forms. At various points in the assessment process, teachers usually take on different roles such as motivator, collaborator, critic, evaluator, etc. and give different types of response to the students. One of the major purposes of writing assessment is to provide feedback to students so that they can improve their writing and progress further. The 2004 Harvard study of writing concluded feedback emerged as the hero and the anti-hero of our study, powerful enough to convince students that they could or couldn't do the work in a given field to push them toward or away from selecting their majors and contributed more than any other single factor to students' sense of academic belonging or alienation. Therefore, assessment is thus the gathering of information about student learning and progress. It can be used for formative purposes to adjust instruction or summative purposes to render a judgment about the quality of student work. It is a key instructional activity that teachers engage in every day in a variety of informal and formal ways. So, how can a teacher assess learners' writing skills? Well, assessing learning and writing involves three issues. Writing tasks should be set that are properly representative of the range of tasks we should expect students to be able to perform. The tasks should elicit writing that is truly representative of students' writing ability. And finally, the samples of writing can be appropriately scored. Let's see the different types of writing tasks that teachers can use in classrooms to elicit students' writing abilities and find out how they are doing. They can be essays, timed essays, multiple choice questions, problem solving as in mathematics, physics or other science subjects, analysis of texts and data, case studies, literature reviews, etc. The length that students produced should also be specified by the teacher. For example, writing a letter, writing a description of something from a diagram or picture, writing a summary of a text, writing to a topic to a specified length in words or paragraphs, completing a partially written text, writing a paragraph using a given topic sentence, completing a paragraph, writing a criticism or a response to a piece of writing, writing a story based on an outline provided. Hughes, in his 2003 book, Testing for Language Teachers, emphasizes that an ideal writing test should only test the writing ability and no other skills, such as reading skills or creative ability. However, practically administering something like that would be quite difficult for a teacher. As teachers, we have often realized that a test that contains a variety of writing tasks gives a more representative picture of a student's writing ability than one that contains only one kind of writing task. The most difficult part of producing a writing test, however, is developing the scoring procedures that will be used with the test. Many tests make use of an analytical scoring procedure. That is, a score is given for different aspects of a piece of writing, such as grammar, content, language, and organization. Other tests make use of a holistic scoring method, where a single score is assigned to writing samples. based on an overall impressionist assessment of the student's performance on the test. Another assessment strategy that teachers often find very useful is portfolio assessment. A portfolio is a collection of students' writings assembled over time. It usually contains examples of students' best work and provides a collection of writing samples rather than a single piece of work. It may also provide a written reflection by the student on his or her progress in writing, as well as a self-assessment of his or her strengths and weaknesses in writing. The portfolio is used as the basis of a final grade. It can also be showcase portfolios, which can contain final drafts of students' writings, or process portfolios containing multiple drafts of each piece of writing. Now, let us think of what could be some tools and strategies that teachers can use to assess students' writings. I will list some of them for you. Number 1, be sure to know what you want students to be able to do and why. Good assessment practices start with a pedagogically sound assignment description and learning goals for the writing task at hand. The type of feedback given on any task should depend on the learning goals you have for the students and the purpose of the assignment. Think early on about why you want the students to complete a given writing project. What do you want them to know? What do you want students to be able to do? Why? How will you know when they have reached their goals? What methods of assessment will allow you to see that students have accomplished these goals? Portfolio assessment, multiple drafts, what would be the rubric, etc. What will distinguish the strongest projects from the weakest? Begin designing writing assignments with your learning goals and methods of assessment in mind. Number 2, plan and implement activities that support students in meeting the learning goals. How will you support students in meeting these learning goals? What writing activities will allow you time for it? How can you help students meet these learning goals? These are some thoughts that you should be thinking in the beginning of setting up a writing assignment. Number 3, begin giving feedback early in the writing process. Give multiple types of feedback early in the writing process. For example, talking with students about ideas, write written responses on drafts, have students respond to their peers' drafts in process, etc. These are all ways for students to receive feedback while they are still in the process of revising and rewriting. Number 4, structure opportunities for feedback at various points in the writing process. Students should also have opportunities to receive feedback on their writing at various stages in the writing process. This does not mean that teachers need to respond to every draft of a writing project. Structuring time for peer response and group workshops can be a very effective way for students to receive feedback from other writers in the class and for them to begin to learn to revise and edit their own writing. Next, be open with students about your expectations and purposes of the assignment. This is not a matter that can be kept secret. Students respond better to writing projects when they understand why the project is important and what they can learn through the process of completing it. Be explicit about your goals for them as writers and why those goals are important for learning. Additionally, talk with your students about the methods of assessment. Some teachers have students help them collaboratively design the rubrics of the grading of writing. Whatever methods of assessment you choose, Be sure to let students in on how they want to be evaluated. This gives them a lot of sense of autonomy and they simply love it. Do not burden students with excessive feedback. Now, this is something that we as teachers often do. Our instinct as teachers, especially when we are really interested in students' writing, is to offer as many comments and suggestions as we can. However, providing too much feedback can leave students feeling daunted and uncertain where to start in terms of revision. Try to choose one or two things to focus on when responding to a draft. Offer students concrete possibilities or strategies for revisions. Try not to be vague in your feedback. Next, allow students to remain in control over their paper. Instead of acting like an editor or a copy editor, suggest options or open-ended alternatives that students can choose for their revision path. Help students learn to assess their own writing so that they can mimic that advice and learn how to improve their own writing strategies all by themselves. Next, after we have learned about the ways in which we can respond to students' writings, I think we should also know what could be the purposes of responding. We provide different kinds of responses at different moments, but we might also fall into a kind of a default mode, working to get through the papers without making a conscious choice about how and why we want to respond to a given assignment. So, it might be helpful to identify the two kinds of response we provide. Before providing response to your students' written assignments, figure out for yourself which is the kind of response you're planning to give your students. Number one, formative response. Response that aims primarily to help students develop their writing. This might focus on confidence building, on engaging the student in a conversation about her ideas or writing choices, or as to help the student to see for herself or himself as a successful and promising writer. This might also focus on helping the student develop a particular writing project from one draft to the next, and then finally the final draft. Or might suggest to students some general skills she could focus on developing over the course of a semester. The other kind of response the teachers could give is evaluative response. These are the responses that focuses on evaluation of how well a student has done. This might as well be considered as grading. Might be used primarily on the final product or on the portfolio of students' assignments. This tends to emphasize whether or not students have met the particular criteria for a specific assignment or a course, or to explain that judgment behind our grading. Now that we know that we have some tips and strategies for responding to students' writing, let us understand what could be the means in which we could respond. We respond to many kinds of writings and at different stages in the process, from reading responses to exercises to generation or brainstorming to drafts to source critiques to final drafts. It is also helpful to think that the various forms of responses that they can take. Well, the first is conferencing, verbal interactive responses. This might happen in a class or during scheduled sessions in offices. Conferencing can be more dynamic. We can ask students questions about their work, model a process of reflecting on and revising a piece of writing. Students can also ask questions and receive immediate feedback. Conference is typically a formative response mechanism, but might also serve useful to convey evaluative response. The second mode of response is writing comments on drafts, and the first of its kind is local. When we focus on local moments in a piece of writing, we are calling attention to the specifics in the paper. Perhaps certain patterns of grammar or moments where the essay takes a sudden, unexpected turn or a particular mistake. We might also use local comments to emphasize a powerful turn of phrase or a compelling and well-developed moment in the piece. Local commenting tends to happen in the margins to call attention to specific moments in the piece by highlighting them and explaining their significance. We tend to use local commenting more often on drafts and when doing formative responses. The second is a global kind of commenting, when we focus more on the overall piece of writing and less on the specific moments in and of themselves. Global comments tend to come at the end of a piece in narrative form response. We might use these to step back and tell the writer what they have learned overall, or to comment on the piece's general organizational structure or focus. We tend to use these for evaluative responses and often deliberately or not as a means of justifying the grade we have assigned our students. And the final one is using rubrics, charts or grids on which we identify the central requirements or goals of a specific project. Then we evaluate whether or not and how effectively students meet those criteria. These can be written with students as a means of helping them see and articulate the goals of a given project. So, take in your students and build their confidence in you. Now, rubrics as a tool for response and assessment needs to be understood more. They can be tools teachers and students can use to evaluate and classify writing, whether individual pieces or portfolios. They identify and articulate what is being evaluated in the writing and offer descriptors to classify writing into certain categories. 1 to 5, for example, or A to F, whatever be your category. A rubric consists of a set of criteria or descriptions that guides a rater to score or grade a writer. The origin of rubrics can be traced to early attempts in education to standardize and scale writing in the early 20th century. Narrative rubrics and chart rubrics are the two most common types. These are the examples of a narrative rubric and a chart rubric. In 1961, Daedric, French and Carlton from the Education Testing Service ETS published Factors in Judgments for Writing Ability, a rubric compiled from a series of raters whose comments were categorized and condensed into a 5-factor rubric. Number 1, ideas. And the parameters were relevance, clarity, quantity, development, persuasiveness. The second is form, organization and analysis. The third is flavor, and the parameters are style, interest and sincerity. Number 4 is mechanics, specific errors in punctuation, grammar, etc. And finally, wording, choice and arrangement of words. As rubrics began to be used in classrooms, teachers began to advocate for criteria to be negotiated with students to have students stake a claim in how they would like to be assessed. Scholars such as Chris Glanagar and Eric Tutley, Bob Broad and Asio Ano, among many, have advocated that effective use of rubrics come from local, contextual and negotiated criteria. The history of writing assignment has been described as consisting of 3 major shifts in methods used in assessing writing. The first wave of writing assignment, 1950s to 1970s, sought objective tests with indirect measures of assessment. Indirect writing assessments typically consist of multiple choice tests on grammar, usage and vocabulary. The second wave, 1970s to 1986, focused on holistically scored tests where the students' actual writing began to be assessed. Direct writing assignments like a timed essay test requires at least one sample of students' writing, and that is viewed by many writing assignment scholars as more valid than the indirect tests because they are assessing actual samples of writing, right? And the third wave since 1986 shifted towards assessing a collection of students' works, that is, portfolio assignment and programmatic assignment. This brings us to the end of this discussion about the tools and strategies to assess writing, and I hope you will now be able to approach assessing your students' writing with more confidence and intention. Thank you.